Hello everyone and welcome back to this 10th lesson. Today we're gonna have a look at compositing. I already covered this aspect in previous series, but just to let you know, compositing, you just have to open a window for the compositor here and then click on use nodes. Okay, got a simple setup at the beginning. On the left, the render results. Okay, and I'm adding a viewer node which allows me, if I divide my screens into two like that, to have image editor set to viewer node, and then I will have the results. Because this is a render node, I will need to do a render before I can see anything. So let's do that render. Okay, now it's done. So if I close this window, you can see now that I can see my render here in the image editor, thanks to this viewer node. Okay, so now it's time to add what we did earlier, meaning the image sequence that we rendered. Okay, you will see later why it is useful. So now I can see in the compositor the sequence if I browse my timeline. Okay, and what would be nice to have at the bottom is here the render result so that I can compare the before and the after. Okay, so now I'm just gonna arrange a few of those nodes and then I'll be able to add some new nodes. I will start with the RGB curve. I like using this just to adjust slightly the red and the blue channels, having more blues in the shadows and more reds in the highlights. Then I'm using a color balance node. Okay, it's affecting the shadows, the midtones and the highlights from left to right. And then I can add some brightness and contrast node, because I'm trying to replicate the look for a photo from the 80s, and what I've noticed is that most of the time it's very contrasty. It's also desaturated at some points. What I'm doing now is adding an exposure node to make it brighter, to expose for the interior and not for the outside, so that my image is brighter and it's easier to read. Okay, and next I'm going to add the node to desaturate my image. What I wanted to do is to mix them both, to have some places where it's desaturated and some where it's not. So I'm going to create a mask using the original image and using a hue saturation nodes to have like a black and white results. And if I plug it to my mix node, now you can see it's either using one or the other because the original image is not contrasty enough. If I reverse my inputs, you can see the result is a bit ugly. This is because it's taking into account values from 0 to 1, and the values that are entering are beyond these limits. So what I'm gonna do is add a map range node which will limit the output of the black and white image from 0 to 1. Okay, so now it's gonna work a bit better. You can see the differences between the before and the after. I'm also gonna use a simple RGB node to add some kind of colored overlay on top of everything. Okay, and lastly, what I wanted to add is of course a texture node to add some kind of grain. So I'm gonna use a noise texture, okay, for that, and then I'm just gonna mix it with the original image. Okay, and you can see the noise here. Now this was not supposed to be here. I'm just gonna correct what was wrong in the 3D scene. It was mainly the light, so you can see here the area lights, okay, and also the parts with the lights on the bookshelf. I'm just gonna replace the lights with the spotlights, okay, one pointing toward the top and one toward the bottom, which I'm gonna duplicate links on the other side, so that if I change one of them, all of them will change. Okay, just a quick render test to make sure it's okay. And now what I'm gonna do, okay, is verify my compositor nodes. So I have my output here, the image sequence, an exposure node, an RGB curve, a color balance node, then a contrast brightness, then I'm mixing it with a less saturated version of it. Here I'm adding a kind of flat color overall, and then some grains. Okay, and this leads towards the final image. What I'm gonna do is to add now the image sequence. Okay, I'm just gonna plug it to the output now. Okay, replacing the previous one. And I told you earlier why it was a good idea to render an image sequence, and of course of the original first, the corrected 3D original, is that I forgot to add a few more nodes, so I'm gonna do it right now. I'm adding a glare node, which is set to fog, okay, just to have some kind of bloom effect on the bright areas, and I usually have two versions of it, high and medium settings, and I'm modifying just the threshold value to adjust them, okay? And lastly, I'm adding a lens distortion node, okay? You can see the effects in the bright areas or in the corners. If I add a number for the distortion, you can see in the corner it's distorted, so you can use the fit option to correct it. And then of course the dispersion parameters will just create some kind of chromatic aberration either in the corners or in the bright areas as well. And I think I'm just gonna change it a bit. Okay, now that all of this is done, I'm just gonna add a last thing, which is an ellipse mask. Okay, you can see it, it's like an ellipse. I'm just gonna change its parameter, add some kind of blur node, okay, because I just want this to be seen in the corners, and use that as a mask to mix a darker color with the original image. This is creating some kind of vignette effects. And now that everything is done, don't forget to connect the output of all of this to the render output so that it's actually rendering this image now. I'm also gonna use an image sequence for the same reason I did earlier, and now it's time to render it. You can see here, if I launch the render, it's gonna take a lot of time and calculate the actual scene. This we don't need to, because we are basing our renders off of an image sequence that is already existing. So if you remove here the node render layer, you will see that it's going much faster because it's not rendering the scene but just actually calculating the compositing. Okay, and here is the 580s look image. Okay, so hope you like it. And now, as usual, it's time to switch to another scene. So I'm gonna do like I did before, doing a full copy and deleting everything I don't need in the scene. Okay, so I'm starting very simple with a flat plane, which I'm gonna use like this, just being displayed quite in front of the camera, in the middle, and now I'm just adding two elements, some kind of large and long cube on the side, and some kind of building-like cubes far in the distance. Okay, like that. Now I think I have my two basic elements, and I know I can place them using the rule of thirds, as I did so far. Okay, and I'm just adjusting the camera settings, the end clip, because that will allow me to see objects even if they are very, very far away, like I'm doing with the ground now. Okay, now I've subdivided the ground and I'm adding to it a displacement modifier with a cloud texture, and you can see it can easily look like a sea. Okay, so that's the goal. Okay, adjusting a few parameters. Now it's looking like it's water that is in front of the camera. Okay, now I'm just gonna detail a bit the elements on the left, and you can see after a while that this, of course, we are on the water, so this is a boat. Okay, I think hard surface models are easier to figure out. Okay, it's easier to guess this is a boat than it was to guess that there was like a dog or a horse before, if you remember. Okay, so now we got our boats and we've got something at the bottom of the sea. So if you've noticed, I've called this scene Atlantis. That's because I wanted to replicate something like people on a boat having found the city of Atlantis underwater. So this is not part of the actual phase I used before, but I'm gonna lit the scene just a bit and add a few materials to make it clearer and to enhance the message I wanted to convey. So I'm adding spotlights and a few lights at the bottom as well to lit the buildings. And what I'm adding next is a simple cube that will cover the entire scene, and I'm gonna give it volume material just so that it will act as a volume for the entire scene. Okay. Then once this is done, I've copied it and make it smaller just for the underwater part, so that what is underwater is slightly less visible than what is above the water. Okay. Now what I'm gonna do, after I adjust a bit of the settings for the box that have the fog, is to add also a material for the water, so that it's just much nicer. Okay. Now here is the render. This is not an animated sequence. I think it would maybe either take too long for me to render it like that, or it will not have the results I wanted. So this is just a still frame, but you can still understand what's going on. A boat on top of the water, and we can see below the water that there is some kind of city. Maybe in the end, what I could add is some kind of smaller boats beside the bigger one with divers going at the bottom and lighting the city. Not having the city lit like that, like if there was natural light underwater, but maybe having divers with a torch who would lit the fallen city of Atlantis. Okay, so hope you find a lot of things useful in this lesson and you liked what I did. I still wish you that you create a lot of really wonderful things, that you have a wonderful life and a wonderful day. Okay, take care everyone. I'll see you in the next lesson. Have a good week. Bye.